Hi there! In today's video, I'm working on my ChatGPT CodeInterpreter Clone project again. And in today's video, I would like to implement the show work feature. So currently, if we select the code interpreter mode here, and we say something like sort these names by length and create a bar chart of the lengths, and we add something like Jack, Michael, Jen, and Alexander. Then what it will do is it will run some Python code in the background, and then it will give us the answer. And here we have the names sorted by length. So we have Jen as the shortest one, and Jack the next one, and then Michael, and then Alexander. And it did it just like we asked, but we don't see what kind of code it actually wrote. So in today's video, I would like to implement that feature. But before we do that, I got a comment on one of my previous videos relating to the problem that when ChatGPT generates the Python script it wants to run, it always adds in the end a variable that it wants to print out, but it actually doesn't put it in a print statement. So what I had to do in my code interpreter, is I have to manually wrap the last line inside of a print statement. So here, we have to do this. Now, it works, but if for some reason the last line of the code would not be a single line, then this would actually not work. So the idea here is that if I pipe the code into Python-i, then it should work. Now, I actually tried something like this already, but what I tried was this. I said echo hello world, in fact, inside quotes, this one as well, and I used this arrow to write it into Python 3i. But if I do this, then nothing happens. It doesn't print anything out. But if I actually run Python 3, then it will open this interactive interpreter. And if I here put just hello world, then it will print it out like this. But what if instead of using the arrow, I am going to pipe it, as they said in the comments, into Python 3i? What will happen then? It will print out hello world. So this might in fact work. Now it does print a lot of extra stuff here as well. So I guess then we have to parse this out if we want only the last response. But I guess it's easy to parse because we have these three greater than signs here. So maybe it's not a huge issue. So let's try and do that first. So I'm going to remove this, and I can remove the row count. We don't need that anymore. And in fact, we don't have to explode or implode anymore. We just pass the code into run Python code. Now we still have to fix the hallucinations of ChatGPT, but then if I change my run Python code, which now since the last video has also this Docker version, so we can run it sandboxed. So I'm not quite sure how we can do it here. Can we just add the pipe here? So actually we have to echo the code, and then we have to pipe it into Python 3i. Now, what is going to be piped where here? Because we are actually running the Python command. Do I need to add this in quotes? I'm not quite sure. But I can't use these single quotes here because escape shell argument will put it in single quotes. So I'm going to put it in double quotes. And let's see if that will work. Maybe I could try that first just on the command line. So I could run docker run irm. And we don't have to put the V here this time. We only say chat WTF sandbox, and we say echo, and we have to escape this single quote and say hello world. And again, escape this and put that in quotes. Then to pipe it into Python 3, and we have to put -i and end the quotation. So let's see if that is going to do something. Okay. Error response from daemon. Failed to create task for container. Failed to create shim task. OCI runtime create failed. Run C create failed. Unable to start container process exec echo. Okay, so let's try without the quotations. But I feel like this is then going to pipe this into Python 3i. And then it's going to be running on our local machine, not in Docker. So this probably will work, because it will echo out hello world and then pipe it into Python 3. But let's see what will happen. If I run that, then am I missing some quotation marks somewhere? let's try again. So, wait a minute. I am closing the quotation mark here. What if I do double quote here and single quote there, and then do that? It in fact did it, but like I said, it ran this on our computer. I mean, Docker is still on our computer, but this is not inside the Docker container. Python 3 version, yes, this is our version, but I installed in the Docker file Python 3.8 inside of the Docker container. So how can we make this run this thing inside the Docker container? So if this is put into quotation marks, no, I have to say this. I have to say bash and C and then put this in there. So this is going to run this thing in bash. So then it's going to work. But now I have to escape these quotes from here and run it. Then now we run it inside of the Docker container. Okay, so that's what we have to do. So let's try to replicate that. So we have to do docker run IRM and V to get the volume and then the container name, and then we're going to say bash C and we are going to do echo and we are going to add, can we do this? Can we put this thing inside of its own variable and then we can escape shell argument this one. So escape shell argument Python I command, and we can say here that Python I command is this. So this is now escaped in here, and when we run that through escape shell argument again, then it will escape the quotes in this one. So that should work. And I have to move this outside of this if statement because we have to still do that in the other command. So if we're just running it locally, so we have to do, okay, well, it's a different command. So actually I have to move it down here as well. But here we have to replace Python 3 with this get Python command because we want to have that modifiable by the user if they have another version of Python. So now this is going to be Python I command. And I'm in fact going to remove this temp file from here because now we are adding the code directly here, which I don't really like because I'm not sure if escape shell argument is safe enough to do that. But actually, well, we can do then this. We can remove this, but I'm going to say cat this one. But here's a problem. Cat will not work on Windows, will it? So what is the equivalent of cat in Windows? So for now, let's just write the code directly on the terminal. So we can remove the temp file, and this is the Python I command, echo the code, escaped, and pipe it into get Python command. Now I'm not sure if piping works the same way on Windows, so maybe this doesn't even work. I have to actually test this whole thing on Windows, but now it should work. So now we can actually remove our deletion of the temp file and our creation of the temp file and this one. So now we are directly putting all the code on the terminal. And then what are we going to do? We are going to try this again. So let's go back to our chat.wtf and I will try to do the same thing again. And let's pick code interpreter and let's do it. And in fact, it still works. So let's actually now change to the Docker. So this is actually running locally now, but we did not save the file for some reason. Let's take a look. Data 175 length chart. Is this 175? No, this is 176. So we didn't create the folder for some reason, which is interesting. Let's actually, for now, do this. Let's say that the command is that. And then let's do file contents command.txt, the command. And let's see what it actually does. So this poor man's show work, but actually we want to have it on the UI as well. But for now, for testing what it does, let's do this. And again, it did it. And if we close it, then it will answer us. And now it worked. So what did it do before? Let's see the command. Wait a minute, what is this? Why do we have these things in here? I think this is from my previous testing. Let me delete these. And let's check command.text. So here is our command. So we cd into data /177 and then we echo this code and pipe it into Python I. And we have here 177, and we have the names. Okay, so I don't know what happened with 176. Let's try to replicate this. Let's do it one more time. Code interpreter and do it. And here we have it. And again, it actually worked. So I'm not quite sure what happened there. Maybe it used the wrong path to write the file. Maybe it hallucinated a path. So that is fine. I am going to test this now with the Docker version, sandboxed version. So I'm going to make this the command, and I'm going to save that command into a file. And I will go to my settings, and I will change Code Interpreter Sandbox Enabled True. So now we are going to run it in the sandbox. So let's create a new chat, and let's select Code Interpreter, and let's do it. And it still works. So that's great. Now, of course, I don't actually know what the output was. We have to implement that in the show work functionality. But I guess we could put it in like a output.text. Let's do that. Output.text is this. So command right now was this. And we have a bunch of escapings of these quotes. Wait, why are there so many? What? I don't get it. Why does it look like this? That is very interesting. Do you need to do this so that you can have it inside of these quotes? Actually, so we have we have this whole thing inside quotes, and then we have echo, which has quotes as well. And then inside that we have the Python code, which has quotes. So maybe you have to do this. Well, at least it worked. So let's now see what the output is actually. So let's copy this again and create a new chat and run it with Code Interpreter. And here they are again. But for some reason we didn't get the actual bars this time. So let's see what the output was. Output was this. Why is it all in one line? That's interesting. Wait a minute. I again forgot that output is an array. And apparently we can put an array as the data. And then it will just write all the lines like this. But we actually got an error. Sorted names is not defined. Interesting. So maybe it doesn't work. So what was the command? Wait a minute. Sorted names is not defined. Oh, we didn't actually sort the names. That's interesting. So that's why it didn't work. So let's try it one more time and run it. So here it is now, and it works. So let's check the command, which is now this. So now we actually put the names here in a list, and we sort them by the length, and then the last line is sorted names. So now in the output we should have the list of sorted names, which is this. And here it is. Okay. Now we do get all this extra stuff here now, which I don't really want. I would like to only have this. But then we can parse the last line from this. And in fact, we can probably just literally take the last line, which will be that. So let's do that. But we can't actually do that because we want to get the errors. In case there's an error, it will be shown here. So, okay, so we will pass this whole thing to ChatGPT to analyze, but then in the show work feature, we will only show the last line. I guess that makes sense. Or in case the result code is not 0, then we can show the whole thing to show the error. Okay, that makes sense. But it worked now, so that's good. So now I'm going to commit this change first. So let's add all these changes. So say git commit m switched to Python REPL version. And then let's implement show work feature. So how are we going to do this? Well, we have to go to our message.php, and here we are getting the response from my ChatGPT library. And how this works is that when it sends the messages that we set here to ChatGPT, if it gets a function call from there, it is actually going to call ChatGPT again with the response from the function. So we have this handle functions function that checks that if there is a function call, then we are going to send that function response back to ChatGPT as an F result, so a function result. And then we return the response from that. So ultimately, what we get from this is the final text response from ChatGPT, but we lose the function call and the function result. And because the function calling does not support streaming, I created this fake stream method here, which will actually just split the text with 42 characters, and then it will fake stream it so it looks like it's actually streaming the response. But we still have to wait for the whole response to be generated first, and then it will just stream it like this. But anyway, we have a parameter here called raw function response. So if we set this raw function response to true, then we will only get the function response from this. So we have to do this and then handle the function by ourselves here, not let the library do it. So I'm going to call this response, and we have to say if is set response function call, then what we are going to do is we are going to have to respond in some special format so that we know on the front end then that this is a function call. So how should we respond? So when we respond with just text, we do it this way. So we have to say data, and then we have to have JSON with a key content and the text inside of the content. And then on the front end, we are going to append everything that is inside the content to the message. So I guess we could respond with some sort of different JSON. So maybe we could just say like this. We might say type is function call, and then we might say name is response function call name, and then we might do arguments, and we just pass in the arguments. So we do response function call arguments, and we flush that. So then on our front end, we can handle this in a different way. And we are not going to do fake stream anymore, because this is a stream. But then we are going to save the response text into the database. And this is kind of a problem. We do not have a way in our database to save function calls. We can only save a role and a content. So we have to update our database. So how should we do this? Right now we stream here directly, and then down here we add the assistant message. But we are not going to have an assistant message now. So I'm not quite sure what I should do. I should probably change this into an object-oriented version, because right now it's just procedural. But let's for now just stop here. So we are going to do this. If it's a function call, then we stream out the function call and we add the message. We have to figure out what kind of message we're going to save. And then we're going to send the stop event, and we are going to just exit. So none of this will happen if we get into that point. So how do we save this message? We have an add message now, which is in conversation interface. In fact, do we have add message? Yes. And right now we take the message, which doesn't have a type right now, but I think we should create like a message class. But let's see. Let's do the session conversation first, because again, we have two different versions of this database. So we have a session database that just uses the PHP sessions, and then we have like an SQL database. So we have to implement this in both of these. But here, when we add a message, we just add it to the session directly. So it'll probably be good to create like a message type. So let's create that. Let's create in our source folder message.php. And what will a message class look like? We are going to have a constructor, and we are going to take in the constructor the message, or in fact, the content of the message. And we also need the role of the message. So basically, we are going to make this the same as the ChatGPT response. So we will have role, and we will have content, and we're going to have a function name, and we are going to have function arguments. Now, we might create a function type as well, so that then we can just pass in the function like this. But for now, let's do this. Function name, function argument. What else do we need? We also have a function response, and for that we can use the content as the text of the response, and then the function name for the function name, and the role can be then function. So in ChatGPT, you have the roles user for the user message, and you have assistant export the message from ChatGPT, and then you have function call as the message from ChatGPT that wants to call a function, and then you have the role function, which is the response from the function to ChatGPT. So we can do the same thing. And I guess we have to set these to optional because we might not have content. If we have a function call, we don't have a content. So let's set this to null by default. And then of course we might not have a function name and function arguments. But then we might want to check that if the role is user or assistant, then we need to have the content. Then if we do not have content, or in fact I will say if content is null, then we are going to throw an exception because that is the wrong way of using this code. So I will throw new exception. Content is required for a user/assistant message. And we also need the content if we have a function row. So we might change this to be function as well. And we might change the error message to be content is required for message of role, and then we pass in the role here, which we might use sprintf to do this. So the role is going to be the role, and I'm going to move this like that. And what else should we check? Maybe that's it. Perhaps if there's a function name, then we should not have a content. But actually ChatGPT can respond with content even when it calls a function. So let's leave it like this. And actually, I'm not sure if the role will be function call from ChatGPT. If it's a function call, there will only be the role assistant, but then there will be a function call parameter also with that message. But let's do that first. And I'm not sure if we need anything else here. So this is just a wrapper for all this information. Now, I guess we could have like getters and setters, but right now these are public. So let's see. When we add a message, we pass in the message type and we add it to the session. And of course, now we have to change our interface so that this is a message. So then we get rid of this error. And let's in fact now go to our settings and let's change to the session version. And what we're going to do next is that we have to create this message object in our message.php when we add the message. So let's say message equals new message, and role is going to be function call, and function name is going to be the response function call name, and the function arguments is going to be response function call arguments. And we have to fix our typos here. So these arguments and this is arguments. So that is now correct. And of course we have to have a comma here, not a semicolon. So this is the message we are going to save now. And we have to change everywhere we add a message to actually add a message class. So let's say this is a new message and the role is going to be assistant and the content is going to be response text. And we also do it here. So here we get the messages from the context, and I'm going to change this get messages to be an array, and I'll add a dot block here for it to return an array of messages. So now I can go to session conversation, and this will have to also return an array of messages. Now, unfortunately, we can't enforce this in PHP. We can't say a return type of message as an array, unfortunately. Now, we could make like some message list class that would then have like an array that we can iterate through, but I don't feel like doing that. So I'm going to just do this, and I'll say this returns an array of messages. So we have to update this because again, we have a system message here. So the system message will be a new message with the role of system and the content of the system message. And do we have something else? We have the new message that we add. So this will be new message, and we are going to set again the role to be user and the content to be the message. And do we have it somewhere else? This is fine, and that is fine. So that's all we have to do. So now we are using message objects instead of just an array. So now we actually know what is going to be in there. So what are we going to do next? We have to implement the saving of this message, which is simple in our session version because PHP sessions will handle it directly. So we can just do this because I think that we can save objects into a session if they are serializable, because sessions in PHP, they're just a string of data, which is the serialized version of whatever you add in the session. So that should in fact work. But of course, we have to implement a way of rendering this on the UI. So let's go to our script.js, and we have somewhere the handling of the event source. So on message, we are going to parse the message, and the response will just be JSON.content. So we will add it to the response. But what we have to instead do is we have to check if this is a function call, we do something else. So let's do it directly here. If JSON has own property of type and JSON.type equals function call, then we are going to do something. For now, let's just do update message, and we give it the message, which is set somewhere, maybe up here. Yes, message is this one. So we are going to just set it to called function, and let's add here the JSON.function name, and let's do a couple of new lines, and let's say JSON.function arguments, just to test it out, and then we'll just return from this. And I'll check that I actually call them function name and function arguments. So no, I just call them name and arguments, which doesn't really make sense. Maybe we should use the same format as for the actual message. So we could say that role is function call, and then the function name is that, and the function arguments is that. So then we don't have to remember all these different things. So if we have a role and the role is function call, then we are going to do that. So let's see if that actually works. So if I now refresh, I lose everything because I'm now using the sessions instead of the database. And if I just say hello, let's just see if this still works. It does not work. So let's see what is the issue. Let's see the logs, and cannot use object of type message as an array. Okay, so we are trying to get the role from the message, but in fact, we want to get it this way, role. Now, maybe it would be nice to make like a getter function, but for now, let's just do that. And let's try again. Let's say hello. And we got the title, but we didn't get the response for some reason. So let's see what the problem is. So let's open the network tab and clear everything. And let's get rid of this device mode, and let's refresh, and let's say hello. And let's see what happens in the network tab. We in fact got hello, how can I assist you today? And stopped. So it worked, but we had some problem in our code. JSON has own property. Okay, so we made a mistake here. Has own property row. So let's try this again. Hello. And now it works. So great. Let's try then code interpreter and say create an example of a sine wave. And we should get a response with the code now, but we get an error. So let's see what the error is. Argument 1 must be of type message null given. Okay, assistant message. I called it just message. So let's try it again. New chat, and for some reason we got stuck now. So we have to close this thing. Let's start this over. PHP s localhost 8032. Create an example of a sine wave. And look at this. Called function Python. And this is the code. And we are actually converting this into HTML from Markdown. So it looks like this. But yes, now we can detect that we called a function Python. But now we didn't actually run the code. So now we just return what code ChatGPT wants to run. And that's actually what we want to do, because we would also like to implement the functionality to be able to confirm whether we want to run this code or not. In case you're not running it inside of the sandbox, then you would like to decide whether to run this code on your computer or not. So let's see how we can now do that. So since we are doing this markdown conversion here, then I guess we could actually format our message in markdown, and then it would just be created as a ChatGPT message. So let's do this. If the JSON.function name equals Python. Now, in fact, ChatGPT sometimes hallucinates the function name, so we should handle that hallucination somewhere, but I think we're going to do that in the message.php. So if the function name is like Python code, as it sometimes does, then we would change it to Python. But for now, I think it's called Python, yes. So let's do this. If the function is Python, then we do something like this. Let's just say I would like to run the following code. And let's do a couple of new lines. And then we can add these markdown ticks here and a new line, and add them also down here. A new line and markdown ticks for a code block. So update message should convert this from markdown into HTML, and it should actually highlight the code. So now, if we do this again and we select code interpreter, then now we should actually get, I have to refresh the page. I didn't refresh, did I? No, I did, because we are not loading this with Ajax. So now it actually says this: I would like to run the following code. Now, of course, we have to have a button then to continue, to say, yes, I would like to run that code or not. So how should we do that? Now, I'm not sure if it's a good idea to use the update message function and do this like in Markdown, because how are we going to add the button here? I guess we could just make our own kind of like Markdown code for that button, but maybe that's a bit hacky. But let's do this at first, and then we would like to append to the message, which is the element that is returned from add message. So it is actually the div element, which is this whole thing here. So let's do it like this. Let's say message dot insert adjacent HTML, and we're going to do it before end. And we are going to add the button to say, yes, I would like to run the code, or no, I would not like to run it. So let's do that. Let's say button class is run code, and I'll say run code. And I'm going to add another button with don't run code as the class, and I'll say don't run code. So let's see if this will put in the right place. So if we now refresh and we take code interpreter and I say create an example of a sine wave. Now perhaps we should have some sort of better way to test this than just actually having to send a message to ChatGPT. But yes, in fact, we have some buttons here, but why are they on the side? So what is in fact this message? So it is this. So we have the identity and the content. So I have to append it to the content. So update message will do what? It will select content from the message and then write into that. So let's do that. Let's say message query selector content insert adjacent HTML. So now it should be in the bottom. And maybe we want to have some kind of wrapper. So let's do div class action selector. So we can perhaps style it somehow differently. And let's try this again. Create an example of a sine wave. And here we have it. And now we have run code and don't run code here. But now we can style it somehow. So let's style it. Let's go to style.css and let's find message content and let's add here action selector display flex, and let's do max width 200 pixels, and let's do run code. We'll have a background of some sort of green, so let's pick some green from here, maybe like this, and color is going to be white, and don't run code is going to have some other color, which should be red. So let's pick some sort of red, which will be that. And let's add to run code margin, or actually we can do in the action selector gap 5 pixels. So let's now run this again. So new chat and code interpreter, create a sine wave. And now we have run code and don't run code, but it's a bit too short. So let's make this max width 300. Now we have a problem here that we don't have now a way to render this after it's saved in the database. So this is only when it comes directly from the message.php. So if we open an old conversation, then there's actually nothing here. Do any of these work? None of these work actually. So we have some other issues here as well. And for some reason I can't click new chat right now. Probably because there was an issue with the JavaScript. But let's see. If we select code interpreter and we say create an example of a sine wave, then here we have run code and don't run code, and it looks nice. So what do we have to do when we click run code or don't run code? Well, we have to send another message to ChatGPT. So if we click run code, we have to run the code and then send the response to ChatGPT as a function result. If we say don't run code, we have to just send a message, I don't want to run that code. So let's do that. How do we do that? Currently in script.js, when we send a message, we create the box for the assistant message, and then we send our message to message.php, which will save it in the database, and then we will wait for the response. So basically, if we click on don't run code, then that just means we have to send a message, I don't want to run that code. So basically, it will do the same thing every time. So does this even have to be connected to this particular message? So we can just add in our UI script, which for some reason we have now 2 scripts that I think we should put together, because I created this UI script when I created this new UI that looks just like ChatGPT. And in my script.js, I already had some of the functionality. But here somewhere, I am binding to the click event of the conversation buttons, and I want to check how I did that because I don't remember. So I want to do something like, it's actually not here. Where is it? Click. So I want to just bind one event listener that will then handle the clicking of any of these run code buttons. Okay, here it is. Here we are adding an event listener on the click of the body, and then if we are clicking on the delete button, then we are going to delete the conversation. So I'm going to add it here. So I will in fact call this one delete button. So if we click on the delete button, we are going to handle that thing. But if we are on the run code button, then we are going to send a message to run the code. So if event target closest run code, then we are going to do that. And we can actually probably return from this here if we clicked on that, so we don't have to check these others. If we clicked on the delete button, we don't have to check if we clicked on the run code button. So basically, we will just send message, and we are going to do what? What does this take? Wait a minute. Send message. It only sends what is in the message input value. So we have to change this function to actually take the question, which it shouldn't be question. It should be message text, let's say. And where am I calling it? I will say here, this is message text. And where do I use send message? I use it here. And I will actually pass in here the message input.value. And where else? Is that the only place? I think that is the only place. Yes. So that is fine. But in this case, we are going to send some other message. Now this is going to be just plain text, which is not that great. But basically, if we just send here, yes, run the code, and then we can return. And then if we are on don't run the code, then we say, no, don't run the code. So then what will happen is we will actually send this message to message.php, and we can then check that if this is the message, then we're going to run the code. Now this is kind of a stupid way of doing this, but let's make the stupid way first and then make it better afterwards. So then what we can do in our message.php is we can do this. We can take the last message. So somewhere we are getting the context here. So we get the messages that are saved in the database. And let's say that the last message is going to be context. How do we get the last message? It's going to be the index of count context -1. So then what we can do is we can say this. In fact, let's take the last message only here. So if we have a message, we get the last message. And if the last message has a role of function call and the last message function name equals Python, then also if the post message is exactly equal to yes, run the code, then let's check that that is exactly how I wrote it, which we should really send some sort of code with this in case you want to change the message here. But right now it's going to work for this purpose. Then we are actually going to run the code, which we can do with our code interpreter. And here we will have the Python function. So we have to get our code interpreter object from here. So we have to in fact move this higher. So we initialize the code interpreter up here. So let's do that. If code interpreter is enabled, then we are going to initialize it. But actually we have to move it down a bit because we need the chat ID, which we will get from here. And in fact, we will get it from here if we did not have a conversation yet. So I'll move it here. And then we should do this also if we have code interpreter enabled. So let's wrap this inside of that. This if statement is too long. I'm not sure how to format this. There are so many arguments in this if statement. If all these things are true, then we are going to do this. Code interpreter Python. And we are going to get from the last message the function arguments. And in fact, we have to JSON decode this. So arguments is that. And in fact, JSON decoded. And then we have to again check the ChatGPT hallucinations. So if the arguments are incorrectly formatted, so if arguments is null, then what we're going to do is we are going to say arguments equals just an array of the arguments. And then we are going to pass the arguments into this function. And in fact, we are going to unpack it. And we are going to unpack the array values, because this should be a format like this. It should be code, and then here's the code. So we want to only take this part and pass it as the argument. Now, in fact, we don't have to do array values necessarily, because we know that it is the Python function and we know that it has only the code here. So I did like this because this is what I do in the ChatGPT library, because there we don't know what the actual function is that we're going to call. So actually what we can do is we can say just this code. And we can say that if the argument is null, then the code is the arguments. And this we are already handling in our Python function. And if the argument is not null, then the code is going to be arguments code. And then we run the code. And this will return a string, which will be the string of the response that we want to send to ChatGPT. So what we are going to do is that the response is going to be that. And we are going to construct a message. So we will say message equals new message. And the role of this message is function. And the content is going to be the response. And we have to pass also the function name, which will be Python in this case. And we are then not going to do this. So this will be else. Otherwise, we are just going to add the user message as it came from the request. So if code interpreter is enabled and the function role is function call and the function name is Python, and we said, yes, run the Python code, then we run it and we add that message to ChatGPT. And then when we save this message into the database, then we're going to send the event stream request which will then read all the messages from the database, and we have to now support the function call message role and the function message role. So we are going to have a function, and in that case, we are going to add the f result with the function name and the function return value. So the return value will be the content, and the function name will be message function name. And we also have to have the function call. So maybe that should be first. Function call. And then we are going to call fcall, which takes the function name and the function arguments. So this is the function name, and we have the function arguments. So then, if the last one was a function, so the function result, then ChatGPT will answer us back with just a regular response. Now, we should also here get the last message and see if the last message was the function result, then we should stream that out as well so that we can get that on the UI. But let's now see what this will do at the moment. So let's go back here and refresh and select Code Interpreter and say, create a sample of a sine wave. And let's see what happens. And I'm going to go to Network tab, and I will remove everything from here so we can actually see what is going on. And it would like to run the following code, which is not really what I want because it is not saving it in the file. So this is probably what went wrong previously. So it didn't actually save the file. Okay. So if I now say run the code, what will happen? Sorry, there was an error. So we should have in fact added that run the code message here, but we didn't. So let's see why that happened. So we got an internal server error, and we sent here, yes, run the code. So we sent it, and that was fine, but then our streaming failed. So let's see why it failed. Uncaught exception. Content is required for message of role assistant. Okay, so here we have the content, which is response text, but we are not getting the response text now. So we have to do this. Down here, we have to say response text equals response content, because here we get just the response object. And if we have the function call, then we parse it and then we exit here. But otherwise, we get the content. If it's a regular message, then we get the content. So then this should work. Let's see if that in fact works. So let's create a new chat again and Code Interpreter, create a sample of a sine wave. And this is what we want to run. And now we're actually saving it. And I'll say, run the code. And it will say absolutely nothing. So what is happening now? Are we actually doing something? We just sent stopped. Okay. So did we get any errors? File exists. Oh, I have some warning here. So, okay, this should be actually if this directory doesn't exist. Actually, it shouldn't exist, which is interesting because the data there is always a new chat ID. Oh, but it's in the constructor. Okay, so in this case, it is going to happen. So let's say abs data dir, and abs data dir is this, and if not file exists abs data dir, then we are going to create it. Okay, but that should not be the issue here. I think it should still run the code, and let's actually add some logging here. So let's add here error log info running Python code. And what is the reason that we didn't stop this event stream? Let's go here, and we send stopped, but we didn't send from here, we sent it from somewhere else because the role should not be function call. Let's add here also error log function call. And let's also add somewhere up here, in this case, running the code. And actually we have stopped only here and here. So let's add here also error log info normal message. And let's do it again. Refresh and Code Interpreter, create a sample of a sine wave. And we did this. So let's check our logs. So we got a function call and we got some warnings. Okay. Undefined array key -1. Okay, so we're getting the last message, but we don't have any messages yet. So then we try to read the role of the last message. Okay, so let's just default this to null. And if it is enabled and we have last message and its role is that and so on. Okay, but now if we then say run the code, then what happens in the log? Running the code and running Python code and then normal message. But we don't see the message for some reason, which is because we never call the trimming function. So normally at some point here we should call the stream, but since we are manually getting the raw function response, then we have to actually now fake stream it. So let's do that now. So here we have to do code interpreter fake stream, and we're going to stream the response text. So now it's going to work. So refresh and code interpreter create an example of a sine wave. And here we have the code. Great. And again, we didn't write the code. So let me try one more time so that it will actually write the code. Create a sample of a sine wave. And here we have the code and we are going to write it. And if we run the code, then it will say, here's the sine wave. So here's a sample of a sine wave. And here's the image. And the code used to create the sine wave is this. Okay, you didn't have to tell me this because it's already here, but fine. It actually works. Now, we should hide the run code and don't run code after we click it, but actually it worked now. So let's see if we say don't run code. So if I say create a sample of a sine wave, and if I say don't run the code, then it says apologies for the confusion. Here's a sample code snippet that generates a sine wave. Okay, so it created another code now. So we should really change the message from don't run the code to something else. And I'm not actually sure if we have to have a don't run code button, because we can just type any message we want. We can either run it or we can send a message. Because normally if we don't want to run the code, then we would just say something like, please change it to something else. So I'm not sure if it is even necessary. But it is kind of working now. But now we have the problem that we cannot render this conversation anymore. So if we refresh and if we go to the old conversation, it just fails. So I'm going to take a short break and then I will continue this project. So why are we not able to render this conversation after we save it in the database? Well, let's go to our index.php, and down here somewhere we are listing all of the messages in the conversation. It is happening here. So we get the chat history from the conversation. And now we changed this get messages function to return an array of message objects. So we cannot use this kind of syntax anymore. So this has to be now arrow row. And this has to be the same thing, row. And then down here, we have to get the content of the message as well, like this. But now we have introduced two different roles. But now we have introduced two more roles, which are function and function call. So we should decide how to render those kind of messages. So let's do this. Here we are setting the class of the message container to have the role. But I think we still want to have just assistant and user when it comes to this actual class of the message. So basically this just sets a different color for it. So let's say this. Let's call this one message class, and let's create some sort of class map here. And let's say that we are going to have assistant, which will be assistant, and user, which will be user, but we will also have function, which will be assistant, and we will have function call, which will be assistant. And then we can say that the message class is going to be class map, with the key of the role. Now, maybe we should set the role to be only assistant or user, and then inside of the message we would have the function name and the function. But let's see, if this gets too complicated, then we might want to do that. So now, this should be fine. So all the assistant messages and the function calls and the function results will have the assistant class. And I want to actually move this up here, and I'll get the user icon class from this message class. Now, in fact, I'm ultimately going to change this a lot, but for now, let's just render each of these different messages differently. Okay, so now this part should be fine. But then, with the function call, we do not have a content. So let's say if chat message function call, so if this is set, then what we need to do is the same thing as we did in our script.js. So let's search for function call, and we should do this. So we should say, I would like to run the following code and then add the arguments there. So let's do that. So if the chat message function name is Python, then we are going to say echo HTML special chars chat message function arguments. Now, in fact, we should parse from this the actual code, because this is again going to be JSON. So I'm doing this now in very many places. So that means we have to do some refactoring at some point at least, but I think maybe this should be like extracted into a function. So let's find where we use function arguments. So in message, we do this and we do JSON decode. So let's make like a function. Code is get code from arguments. And I'm not sure where to put this function. I don't have like a functions.php right now. Maybe I could make this like a static function of the code interpreter. So let's do code interpreter parse arguments. Let's call it that for now. And we will pass in last message function arguments. So then we can move this inside there. So we can only do this here, and in code interpreter we are going to create that function. Public static function parse arguments. And this will take the standard class of the arguments, and it will return a string. And it will do this. And this is going to be the arguments. And we're going to return the code. And I'll add here that this parses the code from ChatGPT arguments. And we have a param standard class arguments. And we have a return string. And it returns the code. And arguments are the arguments from ChatGPT. And sorry, this is not standard class. This is a string, of course, because we are going to decode it. All right. So now we can do this, and in our index.php, we can do the same thing. So we can say that the code is going to be code interpreter parse arguments, and we pass in the chat message function arguments. And we echo HTML special characters of the code, but not just that. We will add here then, I want to run the following code. And we will add a couple of new lines, and these ticks, and a new line, and in here a new line, and these ticks. And we might add here like else, and just echo HTML special chars. And let's just add here like unknown function, just so we can see if this happens sometime. So that is the function call. But then we might have else if, and actually we have to do again else this one. If the role is a function, and this actually should be also if role is function call, because we said it like that. So if the role is function call, then we are going to do this. And if the role is function, then what we are going to do is we are going to render the response of the function, which right now we are not doing when we actually send the message, but let's do it here anyway. Let's echo HTML special characters, and let's just say result from code, and a new line, and another new line, And again, just some ticks here and a new line, and then chat message content, because the content will be the actual content, the output of the code. And we end the ticks, and here should be a new line. So let's see if we can now render the messages. So if we refresh this page, then we actually lost everything because I am using the session version, and sessions have an expiration time, and I took a break that was too long. So let's try to say something. Let's just say hello first. So we get the regular version. And if we refresh and we click here, then we can see this. But what if we use code interpreter and we say, create a sample of a bell curve? Then we should get the code, which we get here. So this is the code. And I want to run the code, which will then run it. Although, what happened here? Why does it say this? Why does it want to read data/orders? Where did it get that one? Interesting. Did it run the code? Well, let's now see. If we refresh and we go here, we don't see anything. And what is the untitled chat here? Something went wrong there. So let's see what is the issue. We probably got some sort of error here. Okay. Parse arguments. Return value must be string null returned. Okay. So I used arguments in both places. I of course can't do that. So let's call this args. And if args is null, then code is just the argument string. Otherwise it's the args code. So let's refresh. And that might actually have been the issue there. So now we can render this. Create a sample, and I want to run the following code. Great. And what is this untitled chat? It is just this. Okay. So that's probably the issue, that we came into an error. So let's remove these and let's start over. And create a sample of a bell curve. And it will create the code, which is here. So then we can say run the code. And it should then run the code and give us the result, which is here. And it actually worked. So now if I refresh this and I open this, we should get the actual output from the code. And we have our message. I want to run the following code, and then result from code. And now this result looks pretty weird. So we have to do something about this. But it actually now remembers the messages and it prints out everything. But I really wanted to have my message here that says, yes, run the code. And I think the issue is that in message.php, we are exiting at some point down here. So we actually don't save it. Actually, we call conversation add message, which should save it. But this is not the point we do that. We do it up here. So in fact, we should save the user message as well. So what we actually have to do is just keep this as it was and remove this else from here. And we have to move this after we save the user message to the database. So we do it after that. So then we will have our user message that says either run the code or don't run the code. So let's see if that will work. New chat, code interpreter. Create a sample of a bell curve. And then we are going to run the code, or not run, just create the code. And it is here. Great. And again, we are not going to save it, which is a bit annoying. So actually, we should be able to now say, please also save the curve. So it should then create a new function. And then we can again click run code. Okay, now it wants to run this code and it is going to save it into a file. So now we can say run this code and it should run it. And for some reason, now it wants to run another code, which is interesting. So I wonder if there was some error in this code and then it changed the code. Let's see if we run this. Does it then actually run it and then answer us with a response? Okay, now it's in kind of a weird loop. So why does it keep running the code? Let's refresh this and then open this now. And what do we have here? Create a sample bell curve. Okay, here's the code. Please also save the curve. Okay, and then we want to run this code. Yes, run the code. And then it says I want to run the following code. So we don't have our function response or the result from the function. So we did something wrong because I forgot to save it. We should also save this message. So now it should work. Code interpreter, create a sample of a bell curve. And it is going to create the code. Here's the code. And we're going to save it. So I will run the code. And it should say, here it is. I have created a bell curve for you. So now if I go to new chat and actually open this chat, then now we have the actual chat history. So we wanted to create a sample bell curve, and I want to run the following code. Great. Yes, run the code. And the result was this. Okay. And I have created a sample of a bell curve. So now it works very nicely. Now, this actually is pretty nice as it is right now. But of course, in actual ChatGPT, if we select this and we say, create a sample of a bell curve, then it will actually hide the work. But now it actually didn't do it. Wait a minute. Let's change this. Create a sample plot of a bell curve. Okay. So why aren't you doing it? Oh, it can actually write this kind of thing. Okay, now it's working. And then we have show work, so we can show what it's doing. So this actually, the whole thing is in one message. And here we have the bell curve. So maybe we want to do something like this, to have it just in one message. But I'm not sure, this looks pretty good. So what should we do next? We have to format this output, because this looks terrible. So let's first just get only the output from here. So in our index.php, we say result from code, chat message content. So we should JSON decode this. So we should say result output. And let's say that the result is that JSON decoded. So then we can get only the output. And since we JSON decode, then the new lines should be converted into actual new lines. Or the /ns should be converted to new lines. So if you now refresh this, then now it looks like this, which is pretty nice. But why do we have so much stuff? So for every line of code, we have these 3 greater than signs. And then if that line returns something, then we are going to print the return value. So for example, here, when we run plt title bell curve, it will return this text object. And then we will run this one and this one, which will return nothing. So that's why we get 2 of these. So really what I want is the last part after these 3 greater than signs. So let's do this. Now I wonder why there are no new lines here. So how should we do this? Let's say that the result text is going to be, let's do again, code interpreter, parse result, and let's pass in the result output in here. And this is going to be just result text. And in code interpreter, we are going to create a public static function parse result, which will take the standard class, this time it's standard class, Python result, which would be nice if it was actually the Python result class that we created. But we are going to do this. We are going to explode the Python result output. Wait a minute. Did I pass in directly the output? I did. So in fact, it is a string. So this is just the output. But actually, we do want to pass in the standard class because here we want the result code as well. So let's just pass in the result to this one. And then what we are going to do is if the Python result code is not 0, then we're going to do something. And if it is 0, then we are going to do something else. So if it is 0, that means everything went okay. So then we are going to explode the output with this and return the last element. Now this is not that great because the output might have this as well. But we don't have new lines there, so that's kind of annoying. So let's say that lines is that, and we are going to return lines, count lines -1. And if we don't have that, we are going to return no output. And if the result code was something other than 0, then we are going to return Python result content. So then we want the whole thing. I think that makes sense. So let's see. If we now refresh this, then we have nothing, which is true. We don't have any output. But actually, why do we get these 3 greater than signs. If we explode it from that and we take the last part. So it shouldn't include that. Wait a minute. That's interesting. There's no space. Okay, so I will remove the space. But that makes it even worse. Okay, so there's nothing. And in fact, this just checks if it was null. Can it be null? So can the count be 0? It can't be 0 because even if it's an empty string, it will still have one element. So I will use this instead. So if it is empty, then we say no output. And maybe I can trim this as well. So now we should get no output. Okay. And let's try to run some code that doesn't work. So what if we say create a chat completion with the OpenAI API? It should be able to do this because we don't have the OpenAI library installed in our Docker image, and it doesn't have any API key. And did I not? I selected code interpreter, but it didn't actually do it. Okay, so interestingly, it actually showed us how to do it, but it didn't run it. So it's actually pretty intelligent. So I'll say the package is already installed and the API key is in OpenAI API key environment variable. Please run the completion code. So let's see if it actually will run it. I would like to run the following code. So we are going to fail at import OpenAI. So yes, run the code. Now we don't get the response yet because we didn't implement that on the JavaScript side yet. And it apologizes for the inconvenience. But if I now refresh and I go here, then we did not actually get the error. So perhaps we don't get the error code because we are running it with Docker. So the Docker command exits with 0 exit code, even if the Python command exits with another code. So that's pretty annoying. So how about we just do some stupid check here. If str contains the output exception, then we are going to print it. Wait, there's no exception here either. Okay, what is the response from this? Nothing. Aha. Why did we get nothing? Probably our piping of the standard error to standard output does not work. So we actually didn't get anything. So in our exec, we do this thing, but this pipes the errors from the Docker command, not from the Python command. So we should do probably that. And let's try this again. So let's say use the OpenAI Python library to create a sample chat completion. The API key is in the OpenAI API key environment variable. So let's do this and see if now we get the error. Okay, and it again didn't do it. Please run the code. And now it wants to run this, so we will run it. And there was an error, so we refresh and we go here, and still no response. That is annoying. So I am going to have to just add a to-do here. So I will remove this. And I am going to say, what should I say? I will just remove this function as well, and I will just add a to-do in index.php. To-do parse result of Python code properly. So now it will just look like, wait a minute, we have the error here. So did we get the error here too? We did. So in fact, what was wrong with my code? Damn it, I Control-Z back already. So what happened here? Return result content. It's not content, it's output. Damn it. So let's say output. And if string contains Python result output, what should it contain? Error. Traceback, that's probably a good thing. If it contains traceback, which again is not a very good thing to do here. Although I wonder if we actually got the error code. We didn't, because previously it printed no output when we checked the error. error code, the result code. So let's just do this. And let's add the to-do here. Handle detection of errors better. And to do handle parsing last output line better. And let's do this again. So result is JSON decode chat message content, and then result text is going to be code interpreter parse result. And this is going to be the result. And that will return the result text. So we are going to pass it in here. So now if we refresh, then we get the error. But if we go to the one that worked, we get no output, because in this case there's no output. And this one is the old one that didn't have all the steps. But now we actually get the errors. Great. So this video is starting to take very long, so I should wrap this up. So how should we wrap this up? We should first of all delete the buttons for running the code after we click on them. So let's do that. So somewhere I have run code over here. So we send a message and we say event target closest action selector is, I think, what I called it, dot remove. I think we can just do that. And here the same thing. And send message only sends the message and then gets the response back from ChatGPT. But we want to actually add this message to the message list. So we say add message, and role is going to be user, and message will be yes, run the code. So now we actually see it there directly. And we do the same thing here. But this is, of course, no, don't run the code. Now, one more thing we should figure out is how we get the result of the code back. Because send message only responds with one message, but we should now add two messages because we want to add this result from code. So what we could do is in our message.php, when we run the code and then we add the message to the message list, then actually we exit here. So then what happens next is we get the event stream, and the event stream is going to then check that if the last message, where did I check that? Last message. If the last message was a function call, then we run it. Okay, we run it, but where do we get the response? We add this message and then we are going to stream the response out. So we have to get the last message. So if the last message is going to be function, then we have to add the function response to the message. Let's do that. So down here, if code interpreter is enabled, we are going to get the response from ChatGPT. So if at this point the last message is the function response, then ChatGPT will respond with an actual response telling what it did based on the function response. So here we have to say if it was a function result, then we add to it the result. So let's do that. Let's do it down here. So if at this point the last message, which we have to get, if the last message role is function, then we are going to add that to the message text, response text. So you'll say response text equals, and here I say result from code, and a new line, and these ticks here, and a new line, and the last message content, and a new line, and ticks, and two new lines. So now, and of course we have to add the original response, and now it should include the function result in the message when it responds, but it will be in the same message. So actually we might change our index.php so that if the role is function, then we just save this. Let's say function result is that, and let's add here two new lines, and let's initialize it before we start the loop, and we're going to say function result is an empty string, and then when we print the regular message, we are going to add function result here, and we're going to say function result is nothing. So if we get a function result, we save it and we print it in the next message. So let's see how that looks like now. If we refresh this, then it will look like this. Please run the code. I want to run the following code and then run the code and, okay, we have to skip this one. So if we have a raw function, we should continue, and we can't echo anymore because we don't want to echo anything if it's a function. So we have to say message content is that, and here message content is that, and here message content is that. And we move this outside of this place, and here we just echo message content, and we do all this stuff up here. So this way. And let's set message content to nothing, just to be sure. So if it's a function call, we set the message content to this, and if it's a function, we set it to this, and if it's a regular message, we set it to that. And in case of a function call, we just save it and we continue. So now, if we refresh this, then we have our message, we have the response, and we have please run the code, and I want to run the following code. Yes, run the code, and result from code is this, and then it says, I apologize, but it seems that I am unable to run OpenAI code in this environment. And if we check the old one, then here we have create a sample of a bell curve. I want to run the following code. Yes, run the code, result from code, and here's the actual response from ChatGPT. Now, why is this like that? Result text. Because I used here already. No, I didn't. Wait a minute. No output. Why does it look like that? I am not quite sure. It's because I HTML special characters it here already. So it should be like that. Okay. Refresh one more time, and now it looks like this. Okay. So now, if we send a message, then it should look exactly like it looks when we open it from the history. So let's do this. Create a sample of a logarithmic scale. And we are going to say, I would like to run the following code. Okay, run the code. And it is going to say, result from code is this, and here is the sample plot. But I forgot to parse this out. So let's do that finally. So in message.php, we add the content here, but we have to parse it. So let's do result text is code interpreter parse result, and that is going to be result, and this is going to be result text, and this is going to be result equals JSON decode this one, and a semicolon here. Now I think maybe I should pass the JSON directly here, because now I have to decode it in two places. Or what does it look like here? Parse result. Yes, we decode here and then we do this. So maybe I just pass the content directly here and I do this in the parse result. And this is going to be the string JSON Python result, and we are going to decode that. And this is going to be the result. So now we don't have to do this. We only pass the content in here. And let's try it. New chat, refresh just to be sure, and code interpreter, create a sample of a sine wave. And here is our code we want to run. Great. And we run the code. And result from code is this, exactly what it should be. And then here is the sample of a sine wave. And you can download it here. That still works. And if we refresh this and we open it here, it should be the exact same, but it's not, because we save this in the database like that. So what I need to do is I need to not actually append it to the message that we save. So response text is not going to be this. We are going to say extra response. And we are going to set the extra response to this, and otherwise extra response is nothing. So now we only save the actual response text, but then we stream the result from the code as well, because we still want to have in the database separately the function result and the function call and the response. So now it should work. Let's refresh this, and it still looks bad because we already saved that in the database. But if we now say the same thing again. Create a sine wave example. And here's the code. I want to run the code. And the result from code is this. And here's the sine wave. And you can open it from here. And if I refresh and I go here, then this looks exactly the same as it looked like before when it came from message.php. So now it works. Now I just have to implement the SQL version of this, which I might do off camera because this video is taking too long and I'm not sure if that is enough for a separate video. But I am going to finish this video here and I'm going to make a little bit of tweaks to this and implement that SQL version, and I'll publish this on my GitHub. So if you want to try it out, then you can see the link in the description and test it yourself. And let me know in the comments, what do you think of this project and what should I do next with it? And make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.